And joining us now to debate the effects the digital revolution is having on literacy, in Phoenix, Arizona, Alice Robison, professor of English at Arizona State University. In Chicago, Illinois, Nichole Pinkard, director of innovation, University of Chicago's Urban Education Institute. And here in studio, Mark Federman, researcher with OISE, the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education. And we welcome back Andrea Lunsford from Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. Welcome, everybody. On the other side of the border, we like to call this program Your Agenda Thursdays because our program topics are very much influenced by the emails we get from our viewers. And here's the email that led us down the path for tonight's discussion. Researchers argue that there are very important differences between the reading of physical and digital texts. The kind of immersion and the tactile hand and eye interaction that a physical book allows is simply not possible with digital materials, and that this has huge implications for how deeply we read, know, or can reflect on what we read. I think it would make a great agenda program to discuss the implications of the transition to digital dominance in reading for learning in the 21st century. Bob MacArthur, we thank you for that email, and here we go. Let me start with you, Mark. What, in your view, does it mean to be literate today?
I think it means an appreciation of contexts, diverse contexts. In traditional literacy, particularly with the printed word, we knew that the author had to put everything onto the page, so it was all very explicit, it was all mandated for us. Sure, we would be transported to an imaginary world, let's say, with fiction. But today, we have to not only supply our own context, but understand the context from the place, location, that might be geographic, it might be cultural, it might be psychological, of those people from around the world that are now juxtaposed with us. So it's a much more complex endeavor to understand literacy. Let
me follow up with Nichole. 20 years ago you'd say literacy meant being able to read, being able to write. Is it more than that today?
Yes, I believe it is. And in particular, is one of the things we need to think about is students that we're teaching today, we're not just preparing them for today, we're preparing them for the future. I have an 18-year-old stepson who's a senior. When he was born, the internet, the World Wide Web didn't exist, the smartphone didn't exist, Facebook and MySpace. So schools always have to think ahead and prepare the kids for the future that they're entering.
How about you, Alice? What do you think it means to be literate today?
Well, I would agree with Mark. I do believe that it depends very much on context. I think that in a lot of ways in digital spaces, we are experiencing a much bigger variety of context. But more than that, we're not just consuming what's going on the web and in digital spaces. We're also producing, and that adds sort of a sharper level of complexity that's required, as Nichole said.
Andrea Lunsford, you want to come in on that?
Yes, I think today literacy means much more than the consumption of text, which is really what it meant in the past. If you could write your name, and then if you could consume, and you could read directions, you could read books, and you could make sense of the world. But today I'd say the production part of it is as important, if not more important, than the consumption part. So students, young people are writing more, I think, more than ever in the history of the world. And I think that's a good thing. Reading is changing, as your questioner. It's an absolutely wonderful question. Reading is changing. Online reading is different from reading in a book. But also, the material that we're reading is changing. And I think particularly of the infusion of the visual into texts now. And literacy needs to encompass understanding and interpreting visual data, visual symbols of all kinds, as well as words. Of course, they're images as well.
Andrea, you say that they're writing more than ever. A question I'm going to pursue a little later as we go along is whether they're writing better than ever. But hold on to that for a second. We've got a magazine in this city called Toronto Life, and this is a piece written by a Ryerson University professor named Gregory Levy in the October issue. I want to read an excerpt of it. He talks about the more time I spend with my students, the more I have begun to feel that in the decades separating us, technology has changed daily life so radically that our worldviews differ in irreconcilable ways. So for the past few months, I've been trying to decide if what I see in my classroom is just your typical generational change, the kind that every generation complains about, or if something more seismic is going on. I now believe that today's students are, for the most part, ill-suited to a university education. and that the fissure that currently exists between schools and students is unbridgeable. Nichole, I'd like to get your view on that. What do you think?
Actually, I think they have a point there. Schools, we've often thought our ability to learn was very much connected by the people who could be put in front of us to teach us. But what the Internet has done, what Web 2.0 has done, is made it possible for us to access knowledge and mentors and teachers from all the way around the world. So technically, your ability to learn isn't based purely on where you live or the university that you go to. So I think we are having to rethink ways of teaching and learning and who we learn from and how we learn and when we learn.
Mark?
And
I think that Professor Levy has it exactly backwards. It's not that the students are ill-suited for the universities. It's that the universities are ill-suited for today's students and indeed ill-suited for today's society. Our university has changed very little since the 17th century, since the Enlightenment. I mean, we have fancy gadgets, but it's essentially the same structure, the same methods, the same everything. We are in fundamentally a profoundly different era because of the instantaneous communication, what Marshall McLuhan identified back in the 60s. In fact, McLuhan had the same experience when he started teaching, that he couldn't understand his students, and so had to do a study of pop culture to be able to understand how to make education relevant. And we're faced with the same challenge today.
Alice Robison.